The moment I knew I was in trouble was not when Carol Bennett handed me a paint swatch and asked which blue looked more like a quiet morning. It was 3 weeks later, standing in her freshly finished living room, when she looked at the two of us reflected in a mirror I had just hung, and smiled like she already knew how the whole story was going to end. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 32, I restore and build furniture for a living, and up until that spring, the most complicated thing in my life was a walnut dresser with a drawer that wouldn't sit right no matter how many times I shimmed it. I wasn't looking for anything. I definitely wasn't looking for her. But some things don't ask permission before they start. Tyler Bennett had been my best friend since the 6th grade, the kind of friendship where you don't remember becoming friends, you just remember already being friends by the time anyone thought to ask. We'd built tree houses that fell down, wrecked 2 cars between us, and stood up in each other's almost weddings, mine that never happened, his that did. His mother, Carol, had been part of the background of my whole life the way a good neighbor is part of the background, present at every birthday, every holiday, every summer cookout, always the one refilling drinks before anyone noticed they were empty. Carol had been divorced for going on 2 years by then. Her ex-husband, Tyler's father, had left the way some men leave, not with a scandal, just with a slow fade that ended in a signature on a piece of paper. He'd taken the boat and the golf clubs and left her the house, the mortgage, and a living room that still had his recliner-shaped dent in the carpet a full year after he was gone. Tyler didn't talk about it much. Carol didn't either. She just kept showing up to things with her hair done and her smile steady, the kind of steady that made you wonder how much work was underneath it. I hadn't thought about any of that until the Tuesday she called me. I was in my shop, sanding down a chair leg, phone buzzing against the workbench loud enough that I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I saw the name. Carol Bennett. She never called me. She texted sometimes, usually to say happy birthday or to forward some article about small businesses she thought I'd like. A call from Carol felt like an event. "Ethan," she said when I picked up, "I'm sorry to bother you at work." "You're not bothering me." That came out faster than I meant it to. She laughed, a little embarrassed. "I have a strange favor to ask, and you're allowed to say no." "Try me." "I'm redoing the house," she said. "All of it. New paint, new furniture, getting rid of things I should have gotten rid of a long time ago. And I don't know the first thing about any of it, and Tyler is useless with anything that isn't a spreadsheet, and I thought, well, you build things. You have an eye for it. I thought maybe you could help me not make a fool of myself." I told myself it was just a favor. A few weekends helping an old family friend pick out a couch, hang some shelves, maybe build something if she wanted it. Nothing complicated, nothing that should have made me change my shirt twice before driving over the following Saturday. But I did. I told myself it was because I was meeting a client, not because I was meeting Carol. Her house sat on a quiet street with big maple trees and a mailbox that had needed a new post for at least a year. I'd been there 100 times over the decades, but it looked different pulling in that morning, like I was seeing it for the first time as something other than Tyler's house. It was just Carol's now. She met me on the porch in jeans and an old paint-stained shirt that used to belong to her husband, hair pulled back, no makeup, and somehow that made her look more like herself than I'd ever seen her. She was 51, though she wore it the way some women wear a good coat, like it fit her exactly right and she wasn't going to apologize for the cut. "You actually came," she said. I said I would. People say a lot of things. She held the door open. "Come see the disaster." The disaster, it turned out, was a house that didn't look like a disaster at all, just a house that had been decorated by 2 people and was now trying to figure out how to look like one. Furniture that didn't match anything else in the room. A recliner nobody sat in anymore that still sat there like a monument. Photos on the wall from a marriage that didn't exist the same way it used to. I understood, standing in that front room, that she hadn't called me to help her pick paint colors. She'd called me to help her take the last 25 years off the walls. "Where do you want to start?" I asked. She looked around the room slowly, like she was giving herself permission to actually see it. "Everywhere," she said. "But I suppose we have to pick something." We started with the recliner. I carried it out to the garage myself, and when I came back in, Carol was standing in the empty spot where it used to sit, staring at the bare patch of carpet like she'd just watched something leave that she'd been waiting years to let go of. "Feels strange," she said. "Good strange or bad strange?" I haven't decided yet. Then she looked at me and something in her face lightened. Ask me again once we've filled it with something better. That became the shape of the next several weeks. Saturdays mostly, sometimes a weekday evening after I closed the shop, me showing up with tools and opinions, Carol showing up with coffee and a stubborn streak I hadn't expected. She had strong opinions about things I assumed she'd defer to me on, and weak opinions about things I assumed she'd fight me on, and figuring out which became its own kind of conversation. I don't like that blue, she said, holding up a paint chip I'd picked as a safe, sensible option for the living room. It's a very popular color. I didn't ask what was popular. I asked what I like. I looked at her. Then what do you like? She thought about it seriously, longer than the question probably deserved. Something that looks like the ocean feels in October. Not summer blue. Quiet blue. I didn't have a paint chip for quiet blue, but I understood exactly what she meant, and somehow we found it 2 stores later, a soft, muted teal that looked gray in some light and blue in others. When we finally got a coat on the wall, she stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and just looked at it for a long time. That's it, she said. That's the one. Told you I had an eye. You had a paint chip. I had the idea. Fair. She smiled at that, the kind of smile that made the whole room feel warmer than the new paint could account for. We built a bookshelf together the following weekend, one I designed and cut in my shop and hauled over in pieces to assemble in her living room, because she'd mentioned once, almost in passing, that she'd always wanted built-ins and never gotten around to it. I hadn't planned on surprising her. I told myself I was just being efficient, using shop time I already had. But when I unloaded the pieces from my truck and she came out to see what I was carrying, her hand went to her mouth before she said a single word. Ethan, you didn't have to do this. I know. That's becoming your answer for everything. It's a good answer. We spent that whole afternoon on our knees on her living room floor, me measuring, her holding boards steady, both of us covered in a fine layer of sawdust by the time the sun started slanting low through the windows. She was better with a drill than I expected, steadier than most of the guys I worked with, actually, and when I told her that she just shrugged like it wasn't worth commenting on. My husband never let me touch his tools, she said. Said I'd break something. You're not breaking anything. I know. That's what makes it satisfying. When we finally stood the bookshelf up against the wall, level on the first try, she ran her hand along the edge of it like she was checking it was real. Then she looked at me, and there was something in her face I hadn't seen from her before, something unguarded. Nobody's ever built me anything, she said quietly. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said the true thing instead of the smart thing. Well, now somebody has. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at the shelf, then at me, and something passed between us that neither of us named, but both of us noticed. It kept happening like that, small moments stacking on top of small moments until the stack got tall enough that I couldn't pretend I wasn't standing on it. She remembered how I took my coffee after the second visit and never asked again. I started noticing the little furrow she got between her eyebrows when she was deciding something important, the way she hummed under her breath when she was happy with how a room was coming together, the way she thanked me for every single thing I did like she'd never gotten used to being helped without a catch attached. There was a Saturday, maybe the 3rd or 4th week in, when we drove out to a furniture warehouse an hour outside town because Carol wanted to see a sectional in person instead of trusting a website photo. I hadn't planned on it turning into an entire afternoon, but she walked every aisle slowly, running her hand over fabric samples, sitting down on couches she had no intention of buying just to see how they felt, and somewhere in the middle of that I stopped being impatient and started actually enjoying watching her take her time with a decision nobody was rushing her to make. You're very thorough, I said, watching her test a 3rd gray couch that looked exactly like the first 2. I bought a couch once in 20 minutes because my husband wanted to leave, she said, not looking up. I hated that couch for 12 years. Take all the time you need, then. She glanced up at me, something soft crossing her face. Nobody's ever told me that before either. We ended up eating lunch at a diner near the warehouse, nothing special, just burgers and iced tea in a booth by the window, and the conversation drifted somewhere neither of us expected. She told me about the year right after the wedding, how she'd given up a job she loved at a design firm because her husband thought it made more sense for her to stay home once Tyler came along, how she'd told herself for 2 decades that it had been the right call, and how standing in that furniture warehouse picking out a couch for herself for the first time in her adult life had felt more like reclaiming something than shopping. "I didn't know you used to do design work," I said. "Nobody asks," she said simply. "It's easier to just be somebody's mother, somebody's wife. Easier to let the rest of it go quiet. It's not quiet now." She smiled at that, a small, private smile I was starting to recognize. "No. I suppose it isn't." By the time we drove home that evening, the truck full of paint samples and a fabric swatch she still couldn't decide on, something between us had shifted again, another layer added to the stack neither of us was naming yet. She fell asleep somewhere on the highway, head tipped against the window, and I didn't wake her even after I noticed we'd missed our exit by 6 miles. I just took the next one and doubled back, in no hurry at all to end the drive. The following week we tackled the guest room, which had somehow become a storage room for things nobody wanted to throw away and nobody wanted to look at either. Old photo albums, a box of Tyler's Little League trophies, a stack of magazines that had to be a decade old. Carol sat on the floor going through it piece by piece while I hauled out what she'd already decided to let go of, and every so often she'd stop on something and go quiet. "You okay?" I asked, catching her staring at a photograph a little too long. She held it up. It was her, younger, maybe 30, standing in front of a half-finished house with a paintbrush in one hand and a look of pure, uncomplicated happiness on her face. That was the year we built the addition on the old place. Before this house, I did half the painting myself. I'd forgotten I used to look like that. Like what? Like somebody who liked her own life. I sat down on the floor across from her, surrounded by boxes and dust. "You look like that again lately. In case you hadn't noticed." She looked up at me slowly, and for a moment neither of us said anything at all, the quiet stretching out comfortable and a little dangerous at the same time. "I've noticed," she said finally. "I just didn't know if you had. I notice everything about you, Carol." That was the first time I said something like that out loud, and I watched it land, watched the color rise slightly in her cheeks before she looked back down at the photograph like it had suddenly become very interesting again. Neither of us pushed the moment further than that, but it sat between us the rest of the afternoon, warm and unspoken. One evening, hanging curtains in her bedroom, the stepladder wobbled under me and she grabbed my arm without thinking, holding on a beat longer than balance actually required. I looked down at her. She looked up at me. Neither of us moved for a second that felt longer than it should have. "Sorry," she said, letting go too quickly. "Didn't want you falling on my watch." "Appreciate the concern." "It's not concern. It's liability." "Sure it is." She laughed, but her cheeks had gone a little pink, and she turned back to the curtains fast enough that I knew she'd noticed the same thing I had. I should have backed off then. I knew exactly what I was doing, spending my evenings in another man's old house helping his ex-wife build a new one, feeling something I had no business feeling for my best friend's mother. But every time I told myself to slow down, she'd say something so plainly honest, so unlike anyone else I knew, that slowing down stopped feeling like the right instinct. "You're very patient with me," she said one night, both of us sitting on her back steps after finishing a coat of paint, tired in the good way, mugs of tea going cold between us. "You're not hard to be patient with. I ask a lot of questions. You ask good questions." "Different thing." She looked over at me. "My husband used to say I overthought everything. Made simple things complicated. Maybe he just didn't like thinking that hard." That got a real laugh out of her, sharp and surprised, like she hadn't expected me to say it plainly. "You might be right. I usually am. Ask anyone." "I'll ask Tyler." "Don't. He'll lie just to spite me." We sat there a while longer, not talking, just letting the evening settle around us, and it should have felt strange, sitting quietly with a woman old enough to be my mother, but it didn't. It felt like the first time in longer than I wanted to admit that quiet hadn't felt lonely. It was almost a month into the project when Tyler first asked about it, casual, over beers at the bar we'd been going to since we were legally allowed in. "Mom says you're basically renovating her whole house," he said. "Helping her. There's a difference. She talks about you a lot lately." I kept my eyes on my drink. "We're friends. Have been for years." "Sure." He didn't push it further that night, but something in the way he said it stuck with me longer than it should have, like he'd noticed something before I was ready to admit it myself. The thing about small towns, and even small corners of bigger cities, is that people notice things faster than you want them to. Marlene at the hardware store where I bought half my supplies started giving me a certain look every time I came in for something related to Carol's house. My own mother mentioned, a little too casually, that she'd run into Carol at the grocery store, and Carol had mentioned my name 3 separate times in one conversation. None of it was proof of anything. All of it added up anyway. The moment that actually changed things happened on an ordinary Thursday, hanging a mirror in her newly painted living room, the same mirror that would later catch her looking at both of us and smiling like she already knew a secret. I was up on the ladder, marking the wall, and she was standing behind me holding the mirror steady, both of us quiet in that easy way we'd gotten used to. "A little to the left," she said. I adjusted it. "There? Perfect." I drilled the anchor, hung the mirror, and stepped back to check it was level. She stepped back too, standing right beside me, and for a second neither of us was looking at the mirror at all. We were looking at our reflection in it, standing close together in the freshly painted room, sawdust on my shirt, paint on her hands, both of us tired and easy and comfortable in a way that had nothing to do with the furniture. That was when she smiled. Not a big smile, not a dramatic one. Small, quiet, like she'd just confirmed something she'd suspected for a while and didn't need to say it out loud yet. "What?" I asked. "Nothing." Her eyes stayed on the mirror. "You're smiling like you know something I don't." "Maybe I do." "That's not fair." "Neither is pretending you don't know what I'm smiling about." She turned to face me then, and there was nothing shy about the way she looked at me. "You've been very careful with me, Ethan." "Weeks of careful." "I've noticed." My chest tightened. I didn't want to make anything strange. "Too late for that," she said, and there was warmth under it, not accusation. "It got strange the day you built me a bookshelf like it was nothing." I set the drill down slowly. "Carol. I know what I'm about to say is complicated." Her voice didn't waver, even though her hands, still holding the level, had gone still in a way that told me she was more nervous than she looked. "I know who you are to my son. I know how this looks. But I am done pretending I don't notice the way this house feels different when you're in it." I didn't have a clever answer ready. I just had the truth. "It feels different to me too." Her breath caught, just slightly. "That's either the best thing anyone said to me in 2 years, or the worst idea either of us has ever had. Maybe it's both." She almost laughed, but it came out softer than that, more like relief finding a way out. "Probably." We didn't kiss that day. We both knew exactly where the line was, and neither of us was ready to pretend crossing it would be simple. But something shifted in that room that hadn't been there before, an honesty neither of us could take back once it was spoken. "We should think about this," she said. "Carefully." "I agree." "I mean it, Ethan. This isn't just about us. There's Tyler. There's what people will say. There's 25 years of history in this house that isn't finished being complicated yet." "I know." She looked at me for a long moment. "Do you actually know, or are you just agreeing with me to be kind?" That made me smile despite the weight of the conversation. "Both, probably." She shook her head, but she was smiling too, and for the first time since I'd walked into her house weeks earlier, the space between careful and honest felt like something we might actually be able to hold onto without breaking it. We tried to slow down after that. We really did. But slowing down when you've already noticed everything about a person is a little like trying to unlearn a language once you're fluent. I still came by. She still made coffee she remembered exactly how I liked. We still worked on the house, room by room, but every ordinary moment had a second layer under it now, something neither of us was hiding anymore, even if we weren't naming it out loud yet either. Tyler found out the way most people find out things they weren't supposed to find out yet, which is to say, badly, and at the worst possible moment. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. I'd come by to help Carol hang the last of the new curtains in the kitchen, the final room on our list, the one that would officially mean the house was done being someone else's and had finally become hers. We were standing close together at the counter, her handing me curtain rings while I worked the rod into the bracket, both of us easy and unhurried in the way we'd gotten used to being around each other. Neither of us heard the front door. "Mom." Tyler's voice carried through the house before he did. Carol stepped back from me fast, too fast, the kind of fast that told its own story even though nothing had actually been happening. I set the curtain rod down and turned around just as Tyler walked into the kitchen doorway, keys still in his hand, stopping mid-step when he saw us. His eyes went from me to his mother, then to the space between us, then back to me. I watched something shift across his face, confusion first, then a slower, harder understanding. "What's going on here?" he asked, though the tightness in his voice said he already suspected the answer. "We were hanging curtains," Carol said, too quickly. "That's not what I asked." I stepped forward before Carol could answer for both of us. "Tyler, we should talk." "Yeah," he said, "we should." He looked at his mother. "Mom, can you give us a minute?" "This is my kitchen," Carol said, calm but firm. "I'm not leaving it." Tyler's jaw tightened. He looked back at me. "How long has this been going on?" "Nothing's been going on," I said. "Not the way you're thinking." "Then what am I thinking, Ethan?" "Because from where I'm standing, my best friend has spent the last month redoing my mother's whole house, and now I walk in and you're standing close enough that she jumped when she heard my voice." "That's fair," I admitted. "But it's not what you think it is." "Not yet, anyway." "Not yet." He repeated the words like they tasted bad. "So there's a plan." "There's no plan," Carol said. "There's just two people who noticed something and were honest about it." Tyler turned to her, and something in his expression cracked a little, hurt showing through the anger. "Mom, this is Ethan." "My Ethan?" "The guy I've known since we were 11. "I know who he is," Carol said gently. "I've known him almost as long as you have." "That's exactly my point." "No," she said, and her voice stayed steady even as her eyes went bright. "Your point is that you'd rather I stay lonely in a house that stopped feeling like mine years ago than let myself feel something for a man who has spent a month building me back a life." Tyler's mouth opened, then shut. He looked at the new paint, the new curtains, the bookshelf I'd built standing against the far wall, like he was seeing the whole project differently now, understanding all at once what it had actually been. "You could have told me," he said, quieter now. "We were figuring it out ourselves," I said. "I didn't want to say something and have it turn out to be nothing. I didn't want to put that on you before I even understood it myself. And now you understand it." I looked at Carol. She was watching me, waiting, not pushing, just present. "Yeah," I said. "I think I do." Tyler ran a hand over his face, the anger draining into something more tired. "This is insane. She's my mother, Ethan." "I know. You don't get to just decide that doesn't matter." "I'm not deciding that," I said. "It matters. It's the reason I've spent a month trying to talk myself out of exactly what's happening right now. But I couldn't do it, Tyler. And I'm not going to stand here and pretend I could." The kitchen went quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of wind against the new curtains. Tyler looked between the two of us for a long moment, then dropped into one of the kitchen chairs like his legs had stopped fully cooperating. "I need a minute," he said. "Just, give me a minute." Carol crossed the kitchen and knelt slightly beside his chair, not touching him, just close. "Tyler, I love you. That's not up for debate, and it never will be. But I am 51 years old, and I spent 25 of those years making myself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. I am not going to apologize for feeling like myself again. With my best friend." "With a good man," she said. "Who happens to be your best friend. I understand that's hard. I'm not asking you to be happy about it today." Tyler looked up at her, then at me, and something in his face softened, just slightly, the anger giving way to something more like exhausted acceptance. "This is going to be weird for a long time." "Probably," I agreed. "You're really okay with that?" he asked me. "I'd rather it be weird and honest than easy and pretend," I said. "I don't want to lose you over this, Tyler. But I'm not going to lose her either, not now that I actually know what I'd be losing." He sat with that for a while, staring at the floor, and none of us rushed him. Finally, he stood up, grabbed his keys off the counter, and looked at both of us one more time. "I need time," he said. "Not forever. Just time." "Take it," Carol said. We're not going anywhere. He left without saying anything else, and the front door clicked shut behind him softer than I expected, like even his anger didn't have the energy to slam it. Carol stood in the kitchen for a long moment after he was gone, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the space where he'd been standing. That went about as well as it could have, she said finally, though her voice shook a little. It'll be okay. You don't know that. No, I admitted. But I know he loves you, and I know he's known me long enough to know I'm not going to hurt you on purpose. That has to count for something eventually. She looked at me, eyes bright, and stepped closer, close enough that the space between careful and honest finally closed the rest of the way. I meant what I said in there, she said. I'm not going to apologize for feeling like myself again. I don't want you to. Good, she whispered. Because I'm done being careful, Ethan. I spent 25 years being careful, and it didn't save the marriage, and it didn't make me happy. I'd rather be honest and complicated than careful and empty. I reached up and brushed a strand of hair back from her face, the same gesture I'd almost made a dozen times over the past month and talked myself out of every single time. This time I didn't stop myself. Then let's be honest, I said. She smiled at that, the same quiet, knowing smile from the mirror weeks earlier, except now there was nothing hidden behind it. I already knew you'd say that. Is that the secret you've been smiling about? Part of it. She reached up and covered my hand with hers. The other part is that I've known for a while this was where we were headed. I just didn't think you'd catch up so soon. We kissed for the first time standing in that kitchen, surrounded by new paint and curtains and a bookshelf built by hands that had learned every inch of that house over the past month, and it didn't feel reckless. It felt like the most honest thing either of us had done in longer than either of us wanted to admit. Tyler took 3 weeks before he called me. I didn't push. I figured he'd earned every one of those weeks and then some. When he finally did call, his voice was quieter than usual, careful in a way that told me he'd spent a lot of that time thinking. I'm not okay with it, he said. Not fully. I don't know if I ever will be completely okay with it. That's fair. But she's happier than I've seen her in years, he continued. I went by the house last week. She was humming while she made dinner. She hasn't hummed since before the divorce. I noticed that too. Yeah. A long pause. I still think it's weird, Ethan. It is weird. But I'd rather it be weird than watch her go back to how she was before. Another pause, longer this time. Don't screw this up. She's already given away enough of herself to men who didn't deserve the effort. I know exactly what she gave up, I said. I'm not planning on wasting it. You'd better not. Then, after a beat, his voice loosened just slightly, something almost like the old easiness between us returning. This is going to make holidays incredibly strange. I laughed, relief loosening something in my chest I hadn't realized was still tight. Yeah. It really is. You owe me so many beers for this. I'll buy the whole bar. Start now. It took time after that, the way real things usually do. Tyler needed distance before he could stand being in the same room comfortably, and Carol gave him every bit of that distance without ever apologizing for the choice underneath it. I kept showing up, at first just for Carol, and slowly, carefully, for Tyler too, rebuilding a friendship that had cracked under weight neither of us had expected it to carry. Carol and I took things slow in the way people take things slow when they already know where it's headed but want to earn every step of the road anyway. No rushing, no hiding, no pretending the situation was simple. We went to dinner in public for the first time about 2 months after that day in the kitchen, and half the town seemed to notice within the week, the way small towns always do, but neither of us flinched under the attention anymore. Marlene at the hardware store finally asked outright one afternoon while I was buying screws for a project at Carol's place, an easy grin on her face like she'd been waiting for permission to ask. So it's true, then, she said. You and Carol Bennett. It's true, I said. Well, she said, ringing up the screws, about time somebody noticed that woman properly. I thought about that a lot afterward, the way people who'd known Carol for decades kept saying some version of the same thing, like they'd all been quietly hoping someone would see her the way she deserved to be seen and had simply been waiting for the right person to show up and do it. The first real test of Tyler's slow return came at Thanksgiving, 5 months after the kitchen conversation none of us had fully recovered from. Carol had insisted on hosting, the way she always did, and I'd spent the morning bracing for the whole day to feel like walking across thin ice. Tyler showed up on time, which felt significant in itself, carrying a bottle of wine and a look on his face that said he'd rehearsed something on the drive over. "I'm not going to make a speech," he told me quietly in the kitchen while Carol was distracted with the oven. "But I wanted you to know I'm actually glad to be here. Not just showing up because it's a holiday. That means a lot. Don't get used to me being sentimental. It's a one-time thing. Wouldn't dream of it." Dinner that day was awkward in patches and easy in others, the way real healing usually is, not a straight line but something closer to a slow climb with a few slips backward built in. At one point Tyler caught himself calling me Ethan instead of some pointed nickname he used to throw around, and I noticed him notice it, a small private acknowledgement that things really were shifting, even if neither of us said so out loud. By the following spring, he was coming around most Sundays, sometimes bringing a girlfriend, sometimes just showing up to eat and complain about work the way he always had, and somewhere in that rhythm the strangeness wore down into something that finally felt like family again, just a slightly different shape of it than before. A year after that first phone call about paint swatches, Carol's house didn't look anything like it used to. Every room had been touched, every wall repainted, every piece of furniture chosen on purpose instead of leftover from someone else's decisions. The bookshelf I'd built still stood in the living room, though now it held photographs from the past year mixed in with the old ones, a life being built on top of a life instead of replacing it entirely. I moved in gradually, the way most real changes happen, a few tools left behind after a project, a jacket that never quite made it back to my place, until one day neither of us bothered pretending it hadn't already happened. Tyler came around eventually, slower than either of us expected but steadier than either of us hoped, showing up for Sunday dinners, teasing his mother about the lavender she'd planted by the front steps, needling me about anything he could find, the old easiness returning in pieces, like a friendship rebuilding itself one ordinary evening at a time. 2 years after I first walked into that house with a toolbox and no idea what I was actually walking into, I asked Carol to marry me standing in the same living room where she'd looked at our reflection in the mirror and smiled like she already knew a secret. I'd built her a small wooden box for the occasion, nothing fancy, just something made by hand the way everything important between us had started. "You know," she said, opening the box slowly, tears already gathering before she'd even seen what was inside, "I think I knew this was coming the day you hung that mirror. You told me you were smiling about nothing. I lied." She laughed through the tears. "I knew exactly what I was smiling about. I just wasn't ready to say it yet." "What was the secret?" She looked at me, steady the way she always was, even now with her hands trembling slightly around the box. "That you were going to be the best thing to happen to this house. And to me." She said yes before I'd even finished getting the words out properly, which meant I had to ask again just so we could both say it felt right the second time too. She laughed and accused me of ruining the moment. I told her the moment could survive being asked twice. She agreed, eventually, once she stopped laughing long enough to actually answer. Tyler walked her down the aisle 6 months later in a small backyard ceremony under the same maple trees that had shaded that house for decades, and when the officiant asked who was giving her away, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Nobody's giving her away. She's just letting somebody new stand beside her." It was the kind of thing that made half the yard cry and the other half laugh, and it was exactly right, exactly Carol, a woman who had spent 1 year of her life rebuilding a house and rebuilding herself at the same time, and had never once needed anyone to give her permission to do either. Years later, when people ask how we got together, Carol tells them, "He helped me decorate my house." And I always add, she smiled at me like she already knew how it would end. Both are true. Neither is the whole truth. The whole truth is that a house full of somebody else's old choices became a house full of her own on purpose, one wall, one shelf, one honest evening at a time, and somewhere in the middle of all that sawdust and paint, we built something neither of us expected to find. Sometimes the person who finally sees you clearly isn't the one who hit you first. Sometimes it starts with a mirror, an honest conversation, and a smile that already knows exactly where the story is headed. Have you ever helped someone with something small and simple, only to realize halfway through that it had quietly turned into something much bigger? And have you ever caught someone smiling at you like they already knew a secret you hadn't figured out yet? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.